In chemistry, a reaction only happens when the conditions are right. It's no different in real estate. Welcome to the Alkaline Reaction, a podcast from Alkaline Advisors, where we break down the deals, partners, and capital structures that turn opportunities into outcomes. I'm Spencer Carenti, and today's reaction, real estate attorneys. If you step back and look at development from a systems perspective, real estate projects are essentially a network of legal relationships. Land must be acquired. Capital must be raised. Partnerships structured. Contractors hired. Leases negotiated. And every one of these steps is governed by legal agreements. Attorneys provide the framework that allows all of these moving parts to work together. Without that framework, development would be almost impossible. Capital could not be raised, property rights could not be transferred, and risk could not be allocated among the parties involved in a project. So today, we're going to walk through the role attorneys play throughout the real estate development process. We'll start with land acquisition and due diligence, where attorneys help developers secure ownership rights and identify legal risks tied to a property. Then we'll look at zoning and regulatory matters, where attorneys help navigate land use laws and entitlement approvals. After that, we'll explore how attorneys structure partnerships and financing arrangements between developers, investors, and lenders. We'll also discuss construction contracts and how legal agreements allocate risk during the building process. And finally, we'll examine the legal work involved once a property is completed, particularly leasing and operational agreements. At the beginning of any development project is the acquisition of land. Developers may identify a property that appears attractive from a market perspective. Perhaps it is well located, underutilized, or positioned within a growing neighborhood. But ownership of real estate is governed by a complex legal structure that must be carefully examined before a transaction can move forward. This is where attorneys play a critical role during the due diligence phase. Real estate attorneys review title records to verify that the seller actually has the legal right to transfer ownership of the property. They examine the chain of title to confirm that ownership has been properly transferred over time and that there are no unresolved claims against the property. They also identify encumbrances that may affect development. These may include liens, easements, access rights, restrictive covenants, or environmental obligations tied to the land. For example, a utility easement might restrict where a building can be constructed on a site. A conservation restriction might limit how the property can be developed. An outstanding lien could prevent the property from being transferred until it is resolved. Attorneys work with title companies and surveyors to identify these issues and ensure that developers fully understand the legal rights associated with the property before completing a purchase. They also help structure purchase agreements that give developers time to perform this due diligence. In many cases, developers secure land through contracts that include contingency periods. These periods allow the developer to study zoning regulations, conduct environmental reviews, and secure preliminary approvals before committing fully to the acquisition. Once the developer has secured control of the property, the next legal challenge often involves zoning and regulatory compliance. As we will discuss in our entitlements episode, cities regulate land use through zoning codes and planning policies. Attorneys help developers interpret these regulations and determine whether a proposed project complies with local laws. When projects require variances, rezoning approvals, or special permits, attorneys often play a central role in navigating the entitlement process. They prepare legal filings, coordinate with planning consultants, and represent developers during hearings before zoning boards, planning commissions, or other regulatory bodies. In some cases, attorneys also help negotiate development agreements with municipalities that define infrastructure obligations, public benefits, or other commitments tied to the project. Another major area where attorneys play a central role is capital formation. Real estate development typically involves multiple sources of capital, each with different risk profiles and return expectations. Developers may contribute equity capital themselves, but they often partner with limited partner investors such as private equity funds, pension funds, insurance companies, or family offices. Attorneys draft the legal agreements that structure these relationships. These agreements typically define how profits are distributed, how decisions are made, and how risks are shared among the participants in the project. For example, the developer may serve as the general partner responsible for managing the project, while investors participate as limited partners who provide capital but do not manage day-to-day operations. These partnership agreements also outline governance structures, including voting rights, approval thresholds for major decisions, and procedures for resolving disputes. At the same time, attorneys help structure the financing used to fund development. Most projects rely on construction loans from lenders such as banks, debt funds, or insurance companies. Loan agreements define repayment terms, collateral arrangements, and covenants that developers must follow during construction and operation of the property. These documents are often highly detailed because they protect the lender's position in the capital stack. Another major legal component of development involves construction contracts. Once financing is secured and design is completed, developers must hire contractors to build the project. Attorneys help negotiate construction agreements that define the scope of work, payment schedules, and responsibilities of the contractor. These contracts also address how risks are allocated between the developer and the contractor. For example, they may define who is responsible if construction costs exceed the original estimate, if delays occur due to weather or supply chain issues, or if design changes are required during construction. Construction contracts also establish insurance requirements and dispute resolution mechanisms, which are critical because construction projects involve significant financial risk. Finally, once the building is completed, attorneys remain involved during the operational phase of the property. They help negotiate lease agreements between property owners and tenants. Commercial leases, particularly for office, retail, or industrial buildings, can be highly complex. Lease agreements define rental rates, escalation schedules, tenant improvement allowances, operating expense allocations, and responsibilities for maintenance and repairs. Because these agreements often extend for many years and involve significant financial commitments, they require careful legal structuring. From an investment perspective, attorneys play a central role in managing risk throughout the life cycle of a real estate project. They ensure that ownership rights are secure, capital relationships are properly structured, contracts clearly allocate responsibilities, and regulatory requirements are satisfied. In other words, while architects design buildings, engineers ensure they function, and contractors construct them, attorneys provide the legal architecture that supports the entire development process. Without that legal framework, the complex network of relationships that make development possible simply could not operate. That's today's reaction. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and join us next time as we continue breaking down the commercial real estate industry. I'm Spencer Carenti, and thank you for your time.